We're in Matthew, the 14th chapter, and we're going to read it and then look at a couple things. But he says to us here, he says, and straightway or immediately Jesus forced his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. Now what's just happened is they've had the feeding of the 5,000. And we say feeding of 5,000, but remember, it was only 5,000 men, not counting women and children. So the number could have been closer to 15 or 20,000 total that they had just fed miraculously. And so Jesus sends the disciples away, and he sends the multitudes away. And verse 23, and when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with the waves, for the wind was contrary. I like that. The wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. This is the Sea of Galilee. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It's a spirit! And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is me, don't be afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, you are the Son of God. You know, they love Jesus. You know, but for those who remember the old, the original Ghostbusters, because I never saw the remake, I ain't afraid of no ghost. Well, that really doesn't apply to them and this. Hit me, Darby. I don't know what's going on. There we go. I ain't afraid of no ghost. Well, they were afraid of Ghost Jesus, They thought it was his ghost, and they're like, ah! Now, I get their initial discomfort. I get that. But the moment he said, Be of good cheer, it is I. Don't be afraid. Let me ask you, what should their response have been at that point? Because, see, I need you to understand, everyone in the boat is in unbelief. There is no faith here. Now go back a few pages with me to another boat water incident. Because the lesson is titled, Will we ever learn? Will they and we ever learn? So Matthew 8, this is another Sea of Galilee boat storm story. Beginning in verse 23 of Matthew 8, it says, And when he was entered into the ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. Now pay attention to that phrasing there. Doesn't mean that the ship was just beating about. The ship was being swamped and filling up with water. The waves were going over the boat. And, if you ever want to see some amazing stuff, type, ships, oceans, bad storm. Watch some of the videos and look at some of the pictures. The boat, the ship is, 150 foot tall, and the wave is going over the top of the boat, and the boat is pitched like that. Just so we're clear, all of those original people that came on those boats, right? If you've never seen the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, they're the size of a tugboat. A modern day tugboat is that size. Those people that got in those boats and went through all that junk, they had guts of steel, y'all. I would have stayed in Ireland. Just so we're clear. I'd have stayed in Ireland with no potatoes before I'd have got on one of those boats. And so, and you need to understand the ship that they're in, these ships could hold approximately 12 tons. before they would actually depress and come far enough down. So this boat is being swamped. And his disciples come to him, and they awake him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he said unto them, Why are you afraid, O ye of little faith? All y'all of little faith. That's what he says to them. Then he arose, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Jesus is going to go over and have this battle with the legion. And the wording here in Matthew 8, it was not a normal storm. It was calm. There were no indications of storm when they got in the boat. And then all of a sudden, this massive storm was upon them. Some commentators have argued that this was actually a satanic attack, and I wouldn't really disagree with that. Because if you're the devil, what better time than to sink a boat while Jesus is asleep and kill him and his followers, kill him and his closest ones? You know, if you would have wiped out all the guys that were signing the Constitution the day that they signed it, you know, what would have changed? And so Jesus has this, and they have this place of victory. And here we are 6 chapters later, and they're in the same place. You see, the ship was now in the midst of the sea. When they started out, there was nothing. The word there for tossed with the waves also can be translated tormented. They were being tormented by the waves. And remember, at least 4 of these guys, what was their primary business? Fishing. On which lake or which sea? This one. And I need you to hold that in mind. Because if you come across a person that their normal work is XYZ area and something absolutely terrifies them in that realm, it's because it is so far beyond anything they've ever experienced. So this isn't just a little bit of storm. This is a tempest. It's tormenting. And I think this is a second satanic attack. I really do. The first time the devil attacked, he couldn't sink the boat because Jesus was in it. Now the devil's attacking again, trying to displace the key followers of Jesus. And so we have this event going on. And we have this big event that kicks it off. And I want you to see a couple things, right? How many people after a big event, they say, I need to take some time off and do nothing and recharge? Do you understand every time you do that, you actually sabotage yourself? Jesus doesn't take downtime to do nothing. He takes alone time with the Father to be rebuilt. See, big events call for reflection. What went right? What went wrong? What could we do better? That's normally called what? An after-action report. Right? Big events call for reflection. The fact that Jesus will rebuke them later on when he's talking about the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and they're like, it's because we didn't bring bread with us. They didn't take time to reflect. They didn't learn the lessons that he was trying to teach them. How often do you and I have something major go in on our life, and when it's over, the only thing we want to do is decompress? That's the wrong thing. The right thing is take time to reflect. Get the lesson out of it. Especially if it's something that struck you to your core and totally unnerved you. Don't miss the seed of blessing that's waiting right there because you decide to decompress. Take the time to reflect, find the seed of blessing, and sow it in for a harvest in the future. Big events call for recentering. And you and I, if we're Christians, you and I, our center is supposed to be God. What's the only place that you're going to get recentered? It's going to be in God. You got to go to Him. Now, I do. I like going to the beach now. Okay? Now, I'll just be honest. The beaches at Fort Walton are way nicer than the beaches at St. Augustine. Okay? You know, when Catherine told me about beaches back in the early days of our marriage, the only thing I'd ever experienced about ocean beaches was some of the Pacific coast where, man, that's some rough water out there. And those, yeah, no. And then the beaches at Camp Lejeune, that when the tide was up, sometimes they'd do military exercises. They weren't great beaches, right? So when she's like, I did, because it was after we lived in Colorado and we got a bunch of snow that year. And she's like, I don't ever want to live in any place where there's anything white on the ground unless it's beaches. And I'm like, and I'm probably butchering the exact same. But it wasn't until we came here to interview a little bit more than about 5.5 years ago, that when we stopped at Fort Walton and I stepped on those beaches, I was like, oh man, now I get what she's been talking about. So it only took 20 years for me to understand her. You say, why are you talking about beaches? It's fine if I go to the beach if I want to take that time for reflection and to spend time with the Lord because I like that location. It's not fine to use a place or another event to substitute for your time of reflection with God. He's your center, not the place, not the event. And the funny thing is, when you look at Jesus, it just says he went up into the mountain. I don't know where he went. It might have been a pretty part of the mountain. It might have been not pretty part of the mountain. But there's a point here with Jesus, and that is the place that we go with the Father becomes the sacred space. Wherever you go with the Father, that's your sacred space. And no one else can interfere with it. Yeah, hit me, Darby. There we go. Go back one. There we go. No, back one. Back one. All right. After a big event, re-engage. Re-engage. You say, but brother, I need a break. If you drop back down to zero after a big event, I hope you got your recentering time down, because the devil is going to hit you like you ain't never been hit. It is a tried and true military strategy. It's a tried and true football strategy. You've seen the team that's up 30 points at halftime. They go in. And I know what the general speech of the coaches is. Boys, we have to come back out. We have to play just as hard the second half as we did the first half so we can keep our lead and win this game. And there is always something within some of those players that they go, we're up 30. We're the greatest thing since sliced bread. They ain't coming back. And the other coach goes in and says, boys, if you come back out and you hit it hard, you can eat their lunch, you can eat their dinner, and you can send them home crying like little girls. Why? Because when you're up 30 points and you have a small pause, a lot of people come back out and they don't re-engage. After a big event, don't let everything drop. Re-engage. Rough seas occur. I don't know why Christians have a hard time understanding this. Rough seas happen. There's things that have happened for 20, 30, 40 years in your life. You go, this always happens when? When are you going to get the lesson out of it so that this always happens and keeps devastating you? Sometimes what's normal and reasonable is going to be affected. It's going to be messed with. You say, brother, I was doing X, Y, Z just like the Lord said, and this tempest came on me. Well, sure it did. Sure it did. What does the devil have to do with Bob Dylan? Nothing. Bob said, I'll sign your contract. The devil doesn't have to do nothing with you if you're already on his team. And if you on the Lord's team, but you didn't even bother to suit up for the game, for the challenge, the devil ain't worried about you. It's when you engage. And you say, I did this 2,900 other times. How come this time it almost killed me? Because you were at a break point. And the devil hit you as hard as he could. You've got to learn. You got to learn. Sometimes rough seas occur. And that's the issue. What's your response? You know, back there in Matthew 8, it said what? You know, being filled with fear. They came, they woke him up. Lord, save us, we're perishing, we're all going to die. What are you going to do? And before Jesus rebukes the waves and the wind and the waves, he rebukes them and he says, why are you afraid? Oh, you of little faith. They've just watched him do all kinds of miraculous, faith-oriented things, and he doesn't understand why they don't get it. And then here we are 6 chapters later, and they're back in the same place. They're back in the place of fear. And they're speaking out in fear. If you don't change your response, you're going to keep getting hit with the same kinds of rough seas over and over again. And I want you to notice, in the Gospels, there's what the apostles say and there's what Jesus says. There's what the Pharisees say, there's what Jesus says. There's what the unbelievers say and there's what Jesus says. And the words of Jesus are almost always against the words of everyone else. And the words of everyone else are words of fear, doubt, anger, murder, all that stuff. And the words of Jesus are words of faith and hope and life. The apostles keep speaking the words of fear and the words of the devil. In all their situations like this is where they keep going to. And Jesus keeps trying to get them to put something else in their mouth to put it in their heart. Walking in fear halts your progress. Now, some people aren't going to like this point. Jesus does not consider doubt and fear a reasonable response. Jesus never said, guys, I understand why you had some fear and why you had no faith. And, well, I just want to encourage you, to take it easy for the next 3 weeks. And, don't do anything too motivated. Take some time after this big failure and soothe your ego and talk to each other about how bad everything was and how you thought I didn't really do a very good job to help you. And then when you get over it, then come back and we'll work some more. No. That's never his response. Yet how many times in our Christian lives have people said something similar to that or some variation on that? Fear and doubt is not reasonable. Fear is without faith, and fear seldom learns, but almost always doubts. Never learns. They didn't learn the first time, they didn't learn the second time. Can I tell you, Peter did not step out of that boat in faith. I know you've heard all kinds of lessons. Peter got out of that boat and he had faith and blah, blah, blah. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Look at what it said. They cried out for fear. And Jesus said, relax and be happy, y'all. It's just me. And Peter said, if it is really you, if you that look like the ghost of Jesus is really Jesus, because I don't believe what you're saying, if you'll tell me to come onto the water, then I'll believe what you just said to me. He didn't step out in faith. He stepped out in doubt. And the power of the command of Jesus will then come. That as long as he kept moving in obedience to the command, he was able to stay on the water. But he stopped moving. It is a weird thing that you cannot understand, and you can have a hard time believing something that God said, but if you take action on it, even if you're not 100% certain, the power of the command activates its own force. whether you understand or comprehend it or not, to get it done anyways. And some of you are going, brother, why? And Gene, I'll pick on you. Did you ever have a command that you didn't understand, that made no sense to you, that you couldn't comprehend? Why am I doing this stupid thing? But the moment you activated it, and if that command said, these people will give you this, and these people will give you this, and these people will do that, the moment you activated it, whether you understood it or not, did the command have a power to make other people comply so that you could finish it? All they had to do was be of good cheer. They wouldn't. All they had to do was quit being in fear. They didn't. Peter got out on that sea. Now I want you to think about this. Yeah, hit me. Go on ahead, bring the rest of the slide up, Darby. There you go. Look at the phrase there. When he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and beginning to sink. If you jump off of a 10-foot diving board into a 20-foot pool, do you begin to sink into the water on your way down, or do you just go? Have you ever fell into a body of water? Did it take 20 or 30 seconds from your back until it covered your face? Or was it pretty much instant? It took the Titanic 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. I looked it up because I want to know what time did they hit the iceberg and what time did it go vertical. And then it took it approximately 6 minutes to get to the bottom of the ocean after it went like that. The Titanic began to sink at about 11:40. It was finished at about 2:20. Peter began to sink. You and I have to learn our lessons from the Word. You and I have to learn our lessons from successes and failures in our walk with God. If you do things in a place of fear and unbelief, you'll begin to sink. If you don't do other certain things because of fear and unbelief is what, when I say unbelief, I mean you don't understand it, it doesn't make sense to you, and so therefore you're not really sure why you should have to do it. That's unbelief. Not everybody understands why you must be baptized in order to be saved. But you know why it's so simple? Jesus said, whosoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. When the commander of the universe, when the Lord of all creation says, this is what you do, you know what? It's what you do. You say, but I don't understand all the reasoning behind it. We have to reach that place. We have to reach that place. There is a place where you can learn as much from your failures as you can your successes. I'm a fan, if you want to be great at something, find other people who've been great in something similar and read their biographies and their stories. But don't just read the biography that tells you about the good side of it. Read about the struggles, read about the failures. Do you need to go to the bad part of Jacksonville? Now some go, no, brother. You say, all of Jacksonville's bad, brother, for us in Union County. Right? Now see, I look at Jacksonville and I go, it's not a bad city. I've lived in places worse than the bad parts of Jacksonville. That's because that's where the Marine Corps base was. The year that Washington, D.C. was the murder capital of the world, the neighborhood I lived in, that following 12 months was the neighborhood that earned them that title. You know, statistically, they figured it up. Every armed conflict other than the beach landings in World War II, you were safer in live combat than you were in that neighborhood. You had a greater chance of being on active duty and killed in that neighborhood than you did in combat. So, and I laugh about it because, it is what it is. But should you talk to people that have lost everything? Maybe. How'd you lose everything? And listen closely, because if they say things that sound like things you say to yourself, be careful. Jesus will come to you. If Jesus is with you, your ship ain't going to sink. If your ship's getting beat up, relax. Know that the Lord's coming, and when the Lord gets there, rejoice. Rejoice. Be of good cheer. Be of good cheer. And then figure out, what scenarios do you keep running into challenge with? If the same scenario keeps beating you up, it's probably because you need to change. Years ago, there was a guy that always used to catch me real good. And he'd catch me real good on my right eye right there. And after about the sixth time, I had a black eye and a bruised cheek. I sat down and I started to analyze, how come he keeps catching me? Now, I'd gone to the eye doctor for years. I had 20/15 in my left eye and 20/30 in my right eye. And most of you go, man, that's pretty good. It is. But my left eye was so dominant, my right eye was always slow catching on to everything. I can see the end of the tip of my nose when I glance down. Okay? Some of y'all got tiny noses, and I'm happy for you. I got a schnoz. And when I would square up this way, because my right eye had my left eye had just a touch of blockage from my own nose. All the time, he'd catch me with a left jab right there on my eye, right there on my face. And I had taught him for years. And it made me mad because I came home from the Marine Corps and I'm supposed to be God's gift to everything. That's what I thought. And he beats me on this every time. And after that, I started fighting left side lead. And he never caught me again. He never caught me again. There has to come a point where you get tired of the same situation beating you up all the time. Maybe you need to change people. Maybe you need to change approach. Maybe there's something in that scenario that you need to change so it doesn't keep beating you up. It's easy to look at the apostles and say, when will they learn? When will they learn? But it's high time for you and I to say, I'm done taking the same lesson over and over again. Brother Rich, when you graduated high school, did they give you your tests from third grade to see if you were qualified? Or did they quit giving you tests in 12th grade from third grade because they quit those tests in third grade when you graduated third grade? That's kind of how trials and struggles work. If you keep getting an F in the same scenario over and over again, it's time to rethink the lesson. Don't get mad at God. Ask God for the wisdom. Ask God for the insight. What am I missing here? And then when out of nowhere, someone shows up and they have this random knowledge that would apply to that situation, but you don't like it. Recognize that's probably God answering your prayer. It's probably God answering your prayer. And make the change. Because the guy that used to hit me, he was of one of those Viking countries. He was descended from those Viking people. His skull was super thick and triple hard. And his fists were like bricks. You understand why I got tired of getting hit by him? It hurt. And I had to walk around with a black eye every time he did it. And did you know, this is before Catherine, it was hard to get dates with girls with black eyes. It was hard. So everybody would know that he beat me. And every girl that looked at me saw a black eye and they thought, well, he can't do anything. I'm going to go find a man who don't have black eyes. And he said, well, no, I use that because you have stuff that you're tired of getting beat up on. It's time to learn the lesson and make the change. To go to God's Word, see what you're missing. Listen to God's people. Listen to the songs. Listen to the prayers. And make that change.